Welcome to the meeting of Warwick District Council Planning Committee on Tuesday, 4th of November 2025. Thank you for attending or watching online. I'm Councillor Bowe, Chairman of the committee. Please be aware that this meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube and is also being recorded. Details of how the recordings are stored and how long they are retained for are available via the Council's website. As part of this Council's commitment to reducing the use of paper, councillors and officers may use electronic devices during the meeting. Emergency procedure. There are no planned tests of the emergency alarm. The alarm does sound. Everyone present must leave by the designated exit route. If the preferred route is blocked, use the nearest signed alternative route. Do not use the lift. Everyone must assemble at the designated point, which is the central reservation in Regent Grove, in front of the police station. Members of the public and press should report to a member of the Town Hall staff who will be wearing yellow fluorescent jackets. Councillors and officers should report to the committee officer. Please do not re-enter the building until the fire officer advises that it's safe to do so. I have alongside me, on my left, I have Business Manager Rob Young. I have Planning Officers Dan Charles and Thomas Senior. Legal Advisor on my extreme right is Nigel Bell. Committee Services Officer Mia Matthews. Highways Officer Dave Pilcher at the end there. And members, can I check that you've all seen the update report and had an opportunity to read it? Yeah, okay. Apologies and substitutes. We have apologies from Councillor Margrave. Councillor Davidson is substituting for Councillor Hazelwood, and Councillor Sinnott is substituting for Councillor Collins. Are there any other apologies? Yeah.
Councillor Yella Brigada is on her way but caught in traffic.
She can join the. She's substituting, presumably. Oh, at the back there, yes.
Yeah, I'm just letting you know she will be here, she's just late.
Yeah, she won't be able to come in. If we started discussing one item, she won't be able to take part in that. Members' declarations of interest. Anyone with a pecuniary interest will need to leave the room and will be called back in at the end of the item. Members are also reminded of a need to declare predetermination on any matter. Please, may I have any declarations of interest? There are none. Site visits. Does any member wish to record if they have undertaken a visit on their own for applications on this evening's agenda? No. We now need to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 7th of October 2025. Need a proposer, Councillor Kennedy, seconder, Councillor Dixon. All those in favour? That's unanimous, thank you. Now down to business. Procedure for each application will be as follows. Each application will have a presentation from a planning officer. This is followed by registered speakers who will be invited to address the committee. I must ask that all speakers stick to their allotted time. Please can all speakers speak directly into the microphones and if necessary move them closer to them. And make sure that there are no devices in the way of the microphone, as this will enable you to be clearly heard both here and on the YouTube channel. Following registered speakers, the committee will then debate the application. During the debate, members, including myself, may well raise technical questions and issues to which the planning officers or advisors may need to respond, and I will normally invite them to do so. Please can I remind everyone that no officer or councillor will be permitted to address the committee without my permission. The committee will then make its decision based on the information within the report, any representations at the meeting, and the content of its debate. Once the decision is made, I will announce it after the vote. For the benefit of visitors attending the committee, all applications will be decided in accordance with the current National Planning Policy Framework and the Council's adopted local plan policies, which set out a presumption in favour of sustainable development, unless there are material planning considerations that indicate otherwise. Applications are considered against policies contained in local neighbourhood development plans that have been approved following a public referendum. Applications in accord with the local plan will then usually be permitted. Applications must only be refused where there is a valid planning reason for doing so. This will help to avoid legal challenges against decisions and avoid unnecessary legal costs to the council and council taxpayer. Please note that I have already agreed that if needed, the meeting will adjourn at a suitable point around 2 hours into the meeting to allow for a comfort break. Whilst whilst I and all the committee members fully appreciate the importance of the decisions being made this evening and that they may well generate strong feelings, I take this opportunity to remind everyone to remain calm and courteous at all times. There aren't any action points for me to update you on from the previous meeting, so we can move on to the first application. Councillor Nepo-Pranger has just turned up, and we haven't started the item so that you can take part in this debate. And first of all, check, have you read the observations that you've received in advance? Yes? Yeah. Okay. So we now go on to the meeting, and agenda item 8, which is W/25/0819, 126 Covington Road, Lillington, Royal Lambton Spa. This item has been withdrawn. So we move on to agenda item 9, which is W/25/0914, 3 Clement Street, Royal Lambton Spa. The planning officer will set the scene and deliver a presentation on the application.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So this is an application that seeks retrospective planning permission for the replacement of the existing timber-framed entrance doors with a single aluminium-framed entrance door and the replacement of existing timber windows with aluminium windows at 3 Clement Street, Leamington Spa. The application is before committee as a result of the number of objections received. Here is the site location plan with the site outlined in red with the application relating to the ground floor commercial premises of the property. The site is located within the Royal Leamington Spa Conservation Area. And here is just an aerial image of the site outlined in red once more. This slide shows the previously existing floor plan and elevations of the application property. And then this slide shows the proposed development. It is worth noting that the repainting does not require planning permission on these elevation drawings, with the application only relating to the fenestration alterations. Here is an image of the previous shop front. And then this slide shows the current site with a photo of the application property itself on the left, and then on the right in relation to neighbouring properties. Whilst the retrospective works increase the overall expanse of glazing through the loss of previous mullions and transoms, the shop front is still considered to retain a degree of symmetry, with the overall window proportions considered to be acceptable, particularly when read alongside the presence of the timber pilasters and stool risers. So just to summarise, the Council's Conservation Officer has no objection to the retrospective works, with the proposed shop front considered to retain similar proportions, with the glazing still retaining a degree of symmetry either side of the entrance door. The retrospective works are not considered to have a harmful impact upon the character and appearance of the conservation area or the setting of listed buildings within the direct vicinity of the site, and the proposal is therefore recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one speaker on this, Mr. Bruno Uric, and you have 3 minutes when you start.
Thank you, Chair. Members. Thomas, come to the first slide, please. Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of the Leamington Society, who strongly object to this retrospective application for a metal shop front that has replaced a traditional timber frontage in the conservation area. This change was carried out without planning permission. The shop's timber-framed windows and double doors have been stripped out and replaced with large panes of glass framed in black aluminium and a single asymmetric door. It looks harsh and modern, entirely at odds with the character of this historic street. There have been over 40 public objections, which shows how deeply people care about protecting the heritage character that makes this town special. Next slide, please, Thomas. Indeed, Clement Street has its own specific characteristics noted in the conservation area description. Next slide, please, Thomas. National and council policies are clear. Local Plan Policy HE1 and the Conservation Area Statement both require that development preserves or enhances the area's special architectural character. This does neither. The shopfronts and advertisements design guidance says plainly, traditional materials such as painted timber should be retained or replicated, and modern materials such as aluminium or UPVC are not acceptable in the historic centre. That guidance has been ignored. This alteration causes real harm. It breaks the visual harmony of a street where almost every shopfront is still timber framed. The aluminium frame looks industrial and flat, and the proportions have been lost. The rhythm of the original frontage gone. Next slide, please, Thomas. As well as other policy breaches, replacing a traditional timber shopfront with a modern aluminium one is environmentally unsustainable. Aluminium has a very high carbon footprint, shorter lifespan, and offers little repairability. Precedent is important. I think you might have gone one. Oh, right, sorry. Precedent is important. If this is approved after the fact, it risks signalling that unauthorised changes in conservation areas can simply be regularised later. That would weaken the council's authority and invite further erosion of the town's historic fabric. The Planning Inspectorate has been clear, you can see that on the next slide, yeah, in appeals at Southend-on-Sea and elsewhere, replacing traditional timber shop fronts with modern metal or UPVC ones causes harm that outweighs any claimed commercial benefit. In conclusion, this shop's brief closure never justified such a harmful alteration. Indeed, reoccupation of a commercial unit is a normal market occurrence, not a significant public benefit capable of outweighing heritage harm. The council has strong policies for a reason, to protect the distinct heritage character that draws people into Leamington in the first place. The number of public objections clearly illustrates this fact.
Can you draw your remarks to a close, please?
The Leamington Society urges the committee to refuse this retrospective application so that this street and our conservation area retains the character that makes it worth protecting. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, over to you. Councillor Dixon.
Apologies, I may have missed this, but the Conservation Advisory Forum, has that commented on this application?
No, not this application. It's just comments from the Conservation Officer.
I assume that the Conservation Advisory Forum knew of this application, retrospective though it is, knew of its existence, however, and have chosen not to comment. Is that correct?
Yeah, they would have been aware, and it would have been not selected to go before the Conservation Advisory Forum as part and designated to the Conservation Officer.
Sorry, Chair, I may be being a little bit slow here. So the Conservation Officer decides what goes before the forum, is that correct, rather than the forum deciding what they review and comment on?
Yeah, that's right. So it's the Conservation Officer decides the agenda for the Conservation Forum, although they can request that particular cases come before them if they wish. So they would have had the opportunity to request to discuss this as part of the agenda if they thought that was appropriate.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Davies.
I'm a bit confused about why the Conservation have responded to say, I have no objection to this application, but they haven't actually highlighted why. Is that usual practice, to just say no objection?
Yeah, so that was an initial objection comment that came in, and then there has since been a second objection from the Conservation Officer that was received on the 20th of October, which sets out further reasons as to why they don't object to the application.
Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Councillor Bird. As members will recall, we've had some fairly long, painful discussions over the last 2 years on double glazing and replacement of double glazing and protecting in conservation areas the original glazing. Why is this not the same sort of discussion that we've had previously on other buildings for this particular development or change, I should say?
So in this case, the application within the most recent response from our conservation officer, you'll see that the previous timber doors and windows are likely to be not original, and then also this property is not a listed building, so it's not as stringent in regards to single glazing and double glazing and the materials to be used. So that's why in this instance an objection has not been forthcoming, and they consider that there is no harm in this specific instance.
So likely to, but we don't actually know if they were the original. But should we give more weight than to the fact it's not a listed building compared to other discussions on this point?
Yeah, so listed buildings obviously have more heritage significance. This is just a building within the conservation area, so we're not as strict as imposing the acceptability of double glazing in most instances within a conservation area, unless it's subject to an Article 4 direction. Then changes from single to double glazing would be considered acceptable.
Councillor Luckhurst.
Thank you, Chair. Just to get a bit of clarification, it's acceptable if the windows aren't original, but not acceptable if they are. So is conservation looking just to preserve the original items, or is it to preserve the character of the area? We'll try and work out.
Yeah, apologies. The main reference I was trying to make in regards to the original glazing is specifically in regards to, I guess, listed buildings where we've got guidance specifically that's a lot stricter in regards to the changes there. So you're correct, obviously we'd be looking at the character currently of the windows in the conservation area and windows within the street scene, but with this property not being a listed building, the controls aren't as stringent in regards to the changes from single to double glazing.
It all comes down to listing, essentially, rather than area character. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Davies.
Like, this is where I'm a bit confused and kind of on Councillor Phillips' points and Councillor Luckhurst. With the debate that we continuously have about list buildings and changing windows, which obviously I've been very passionate about allowing people to do to have better sustainability, but always on the argument that we retain the features of what, you know, fits in with the area. And it says that conservation areas are to protect the character or appearance which is desirable to preserve or enhance. So I understand allowing to change to double glazing or change the windows, but I don't understand why we aren't requiring it to fit in with the character of the local area. I understand it's not a listed building, but it is still a conservation area, and I can't wrap my head around that.
Yeah, I guess in this instance, I'd refer to the guidance. So yes, obviously, as part of these proposals, we're losing the transoms and mullions that form part of the original glazing. But the guidance itself, there's a specific kind of emphasis upon the extent of the glazing. So I think that the term is to avoid excessive glazing. I don't have it before me, but yeah, I think it's something along those lines in regards to the excessive size. In this instance, the glazing is not considered to be excessive in nature. It's considered to be of similar proportions. Yes, there is the removal of the mullions, but you've also still got the presence of the timber pilasters and the stool risers, so it's not a large expanse of glazing. So whilst there is the breakup of those mullions and transoms, the extent of the glazing that's proposed as part of this application is not considered to be overly large. That would result in a harm to the character of the conservation area, hence why the conservation officer has submitted no objection to the proposals
Councillor Gifford.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's fairly clear that on looking at our own policies, that we would normally, obviously with a listed building, we would certainly insist on it being hardwood, and it would be, if we were to replace the window at all, and it being exactly as it had been before. But even within the conservation area, we try and keep them as they were, you know. And I feel very sorry for the applicant, but who's obviously spent a lot of money on having but that's not a consideration for us. And I just sort of, I suspect this would have been a very simple decision if it wasn't retrospective, in that it would be quite straightforward. We would have, the advice given to the applicant would have been to renew it with a wooden window frames, and that's what we would normally expect. And I've been frequently told that we shouldn't look at a retrospective application other than as any other application, except the fact that it being built retrospectively means that we have the advantage of being able to see what it looks like. I feel it's fairly clear, looking at our policies, that this doesn't meet with our policies. But I would like your opinion as to why you feel, whether you'd agree that essentially it doesn't meet with our policies, and why it's exceptional. Because it's not a sudden, it's not a contemporary building that's just been put up, where the aluminium might be appropriate. It's an old building with, I'm sure the previous shop front wasn't original either, but at least it was wooden, and it sort of gave an impression of being, that it might have been, gave the impression of being, of that fitting with the age of the building.
Yeah, so obviously as part of these applications, we're guided by our conservation officer, who has come back in and set out that they don't consider there to be any harm to the character and appearance of the area as a result of these alterations. And whilst, yes, there's the loss of the timber windows, within the SPG itself, there isn't an explicit notion that the windows need to be comprised of timber. So there is the potential for aluminium to be used. So that's without that specifically laid out as being unacceptable. We'd consider that the proposed aluminium there, whilst yes, it's metal, it's not timber, it is an acceptable finish within a conservation area, and the conservation officer doesn't have an objection to that. And I guess my key thing comes back to the glazing, and it's whilst it's not considered, whilst obviously we've got the mullions and the transoms that are being removed, the extent that is proposed is not considered to result in a large expansion of consistent glazing, which the SPG specifically sets out within diagrams what wouldn't be allowed. You've got the stall risers, you've got the pilasters. So from that standpoint, and considering that the SPG doesn't specifically set out that timber would be required, that's why I guess the conservation officer doesn't have an objection, to which then that's our response to this application.
Councillor Luckhurst.
Thank you, Chair. does seem that if we're protecting the materials, not the character, it offers a handy loophole. If somebody were to have an accident, they could just get around the screws that way. But anyway, my question is, if the committee were minded to refuse on conservation grounds, but the conservation officer hasn't objected, where would that stand? This is probably a question for legal. Thank you.
Chairman, we'd have to find a conservation officer who is willing to give evidence at any appeal to defend the committee's decision. But that couldn't be the conservation officer who had no objection.
Challenging, I think, is the answer. Anyone else? Councillor Kennedy.
Having heard the discussion and where, I think we are where we are with this, and if our conservation officer has no objections in the end, I would propose that we vote to grant planning permission in accordance with officer's recommendations.
Thank you. So I have a proposal. Do I have a seconder anyway? Councillor Davis. Anyone else wish to speak? We'll move to the vote. So you're voting to go along with the recommendation as set out in the papers, which is to grant retrospectively. All those in favour, please show. Then move on to agenda item 6, which is W/25/1214, land on the south side of Chesterton Drive, Royal Lambton Spa.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is application W25/1214, which is land on the south side of Chesterton Gardens. And the proposal is for the variation of conditions 30, which relates to the site access provision, and condition 31, the traffic management scheme of outline planning permission W/20/0617, which related to an outline application for up to 200 dwellings with all matters reserved apart from access. And the proposal is to amend the triggers relating to the delivery of the completed site access and traffic management scheme. So the scope of consideration, obviously it is varying the two conditions that are in front of us. So matters relating to the general principle and the actual overall access point and access matters were previously approved and cannot be reconsidered at this stage. And the matters on this application are limited to the revised conditions for the delivery of the access point and traffic management scheme only, and there are no other issues under consideration on this application. So this is the application site, as I'm sure members are aware, with the site edged in red, forming just under half of the proposed allocation. That's the land identified in blue as well, a total allocation of up to 500 dwellings. This scheme is for up to 200. So just an aerial photograph of the site, with the site roughly indicated in yellow, just to give members a feel for the surrounding area. And then this was the site plan as proposed, and that was approved by members at committee earlier this year for the revisions to the layout to provide for the Bellway product in lieu of the AC Lloyd that was previously approved. So this is the approved access point. It's to remain unchanged, and that's the final access point that will be delivered when the scheme is completed. It's priority junction with priority to vehicles entering the site and vehicles giving way on exit of the site. The site access crosses the bridleway, which is the dotted area here, which runs east-west along the boundary of the site. And measures are in place with bollards in order to prevent vehicles from accessing the bridleway, turning in or out of the access point. So this was the previously proposed temporary access layout that was submitted with the application. Following discussions with the County Highways Authority, it's been looked at by the technical specialists in the adoptions team who have looked at the issue and have raised some concerns with the access point. So this has now been revised to this access point, which is similar in design to the final access point, with the narrowing of the carriageway, but there are certain elements that make it temporary, and that will be then, once the works are complete, will revert and be required to be in line with the approved access point once that's been finalised with the adoptions team of the County Council. This is just showing the traffic management measures through the periphery of the site. Obviously, the access points running up to the site. There are areas already with flush block paving features. It's proposed to install additional flush block paving features, together with new 20-mile-an-hour limit signs as shown in this location here. So just some photos. This is the site prior to the commencement of the development. And this is the site looking back towards Brimstone End. And then this is just looking west along the bridleway with the access point in the approximate location of the gate. And looking east along the bridleway, again with the access point being in the approximate location of the gate. And then just the site photograph showing across the site with the access will be on the right-hand side on the hedge line. And then looking back along the road from the corner of the site, looking back east towards the access. And then just another view, a wider view of the site. Matters relating to principal and access were approved at the outline stage. Reserve matters has been previously approved by members for up to 185 dwellings. The proposal would still require the delivery of the access and traffic management features. It's just they will be delivered at a more appropriate time. We've received no objections from County Highways and no other changes are proposed with the variation of conditions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I have a number of speakers. Let's start off with Councillor Ruggie Singh from Rowland Spa Town Council, who are objecting. You have 3 minutes from when you start.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say the Town Council objects to the variation of conditions 30 and 31 due to the impact on the highways element of the scheme.
That was quick. Thank you. Mr. Jeremy Brooks, objecting. You have 3 minutes, you don't get any extra from that one.
Good evening, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jez Brooks. I live on Brimstone End, directly beside the Bridleway entrance to the Bellway development. I'm speaking today on behalf of my family and many of the neighbours who share the same concerns. Before I start, I actually want to make a plea to Bellway, to our local councillor Will Roberts, and to anyone else who can help move this forward. Please, please come together and resolve the issues that are preventing access through the land behind the school. Everyone knows that land will form part of the next phase of around 300 homes anyway. If that route were planned now, it would remove the danger, the stress for current residents, and the need for this very application. You may not be legally obliged to do it today, but for the sake of everyone involved, please make the effort to find a solution now. We're already seeing why these conditions matter. In the first few weeks, deliveries have arrived early, sometimes several lorries at once. The site manager has admitted to me personally that multiple drivers have been told not to return for speeding. The barriers around the trenches outside my home aren't secured. They blow into the road almost daily and leave gaps where my 4 and 2-year-olds and other local children aged 4 to 9 could fall through. Even when I've made multiple requests to the site manager to have them secured. When neighbours briefly blocked contractors' vans because of the roadworks last week, drivers leaned on their horns and sped off aggressively through the estate thereafter. This is the lived reality of construction on a road that was never designed for it, and the reasons the inspector imposed these conditions in the interests of highway safety in the first place. As you're well aware, our street is the final stretch of the main artery road serving both the existing Chesterton Gardens estate and this new development. It's also the route many children use on their way to school. Every vehicle entering or leaving the site must pass our homes at this bottleneck. At the same point, the site access crosses public right-of-way W119, which is frequently used by walkers, cyclists and horse riders. Lorries are already mounting the pavement opposite to pass one another, and delaying the permanent safety works will place both residents and right-of-way users at continued risk. Residents are not asking for miracles, only that the inspector's conditions remain as written, with the permanent access and traffic management scheme delivered before first occupation, and a robust construction traffic management plan enforced from day one. It's disappointing that instead of working with Councillor Will Roberts and Campion Stool to fix the underlying access problem, Bellway has chosen to submit an application to weaken the very safeguards the inspector required to protect us. They have an opportunity now to show genuine goodwill by solving this properly. Through the school side land, and instead of asking residents to bear years of avoidable risk. For the safety of our families and the integrity of the inspector's decision, please uphold the safeguards and refuse this variation. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Mrs. Sheila Cooper. Objecting, you have 3 minutes.
Conditions 30 and 31 were hard-won mitigation against the serious road safety issues resulting from the single access route and dangerous public right-of-way, bridle-way crossing into the development. The road safety audit and Tucker response commissioned on behalf of WCC were core documents at the 2021 appeal on which approval was based. The serious safety issues highlighted were factual and accepted in the response. The construction management plan also evidenced road safety issues from construction traffic using narrow estate roads for access. Evidence determined the appeal decision with conditions 30 and 31 necessary in the interests of road safety. Dangerous queuing and idling HGVs, breaches of school-run moratoriums, muddy road hazards, overrun groundwork, heavily laden HGVs and low loaders blocking bends and lost within the estate are road safety nightmares. The dangerous temporary bridleway footpath surfaces, intrusive fencing, mud and trip hazards and uncontrolled construction traffic confirms variation of conditions 30 and 31 should be refused. Work on the permanent public rights-of-way access and surfacing, including carriageway narrowing, finished roads, give-way and priority signage and bollards to prevent misuse should be expedited alongside full estate traffic calming, including 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. Bellway must also provide fully operational site access and traffic control measures during working hours. The safety and well-being of affected residents, all users of the public right-of-way, are at risk, with parents deeply concerned for the safety of their children. Without permanent safety mitigation, this is a catastrophe waiting to happen. Who will take responsibility for a minor incident or be accountable for a fatal or life-changing accident? Conditions 30 and 31 should be immediately triggered with urgent construction of the permanent public right-of-way crossing and estate traffic calming. After full assessment, Highways gave the prevention of damage to permanent works and the developer providing the works at a more appropriate time as reasons for not objecting. More appropriate for whom? Developer convenience and saving money on maintenance against the safety of affected residents and their families raises questions on the entire decision-making process, and especially the probity in officer recommendations. If an unreliable approval precedent is set for development convenience and against possible future cost at the expense of the safety and well-being of local residents and their families, it is a sad day for the credibility of planning due process. Please refuse application W25 1214. Thank you.
Thank you. Now call on Elizabeth White, also objecting. You have 3 minutes when you start.
Good evening. At the Whitnash End, ancient Via Regia Bridleway has been unofficially renamed Greenfield Road and used to assess safe access and egress. The Leamington end of the haulage route is the dangerous, surely mismodelled junction at the entrance to the aspiring 800++ dwelling cul-de-sac, bearing the full cumulative brunt with no noise assessment. Transport Consultant admitted it was unusual to have driveways so near to junctions. This is the school route to both Sydenham Primary and Campion schools. No one goes via Moncrief, which is uphill and much longer. Many children play in the open space across the road from the dangerous junction. Bungalows with elderly disabled residents are situated here and have to cross this road to the bus stop. Properties have been digitally moved here. Several residents have already experienced 19 years of construction traffic, with a further 3 years, 3 months estimated. What a way to treat one of the lights of Leamington. Even the recent appeal decision describes this as upsetting. Traffic management scheme not uploaded to enable fair and proper consultation indicates measures designed to slow the enormous haulage traffic now dangerously tearing through the estates and protect Withybank flats with windows now at road level since the 14th of Chesterton Gardens. Construction management condition appears to allow peak hour deliveries and has been discharged with longer hours than the appeal conditions or newsletter. These roads are not currently subject to a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit per transport assessment. And just to stress, this is a master plan, not the consulted local plan. Councillor Kennedy has previously objected strongly to the single access as dangerous and unsuitable. Councillor Gifford has previously not been happy with the single access route but concerned about getting any support at planning inquiry. These are planning inspector conditions imposed by not just one, but 2 planning inspectors. The most recent one suggesting a new road safety Orsted is required, current not countersigned. In July, Councillor Davidson said she thought this application should be scrapped and start again, and she's right. To be really safe, sound and sustainable and probably legally compliant would require a new outline, and you are the LPA. Minor amendment, replan with a different number of dwellings with no amended plan should not be acceptable. Breach, altered and omitted conditions detailed on the portal. No other. You are also being asked here to allow revisions to the final list of conditions, including local wildlife sites, Whitnash Brook and tree protection. Surely this is not right. Who authorised commencement? This is very real injustice and absolutely a major accident waiting to happen. Given these conditions are deemed necessary in the interest of highway safety, not just by 1 but 2 planning inspectors along this single access school route, in the interest of public office accountability, please hold a recorded vote, and given the apparent safety implications, please do not delegate the authority invested in you. Thank you.
Thank you. I now have the final speaker, Chris O'Hanlon, supporter applicant. You also have 3 minutes when you start.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the Planning Committee, thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening on this application. My name is Chris O'Hanlon. I'm the Senior Planning Manager for Bellway Homes West Midlands, who are the applicants in this case, and we are currently building out the scheme for 185 much-needed houses on this site. The proposals before you tonight are solely concerned with the timing of delivery of the access works and the traffic management scheme. I can assure you that Bellway are not seeking to remove these obligations and that they will be implemented. However, what we are seeking to do is to implement them in such a way that minimises disruption and delay on the local highway network. Your officers have considered the impacts of the proposed changes in terms of highway safety, visual amenity and impact on local residents, and they have concluded that the proposals are acceptable having regard to all relevant policies of the development plan. The County Highways Officer has undertaken a full assessment of the proposals and concluded that there would be no adverse impact in terms of highway safety. This is because the resultant scheme remains unchanged and the final access solution and traffic management features will still need to be installed in accordance with the approved details. The only changes being proposed are the trigger points for installing these measures. Bellway Homes agree with the views of both the planning and highways officers who have recommended that this application is approved, and we respectfully request that you grant permission in accordance with their recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, over to you. Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair. Seems to me that there have been two really important issues raised by the speakers. The first is that there appear to be significant breaches of the construction management plan. And I know that's not what we're looking at this committee, but I don't know whether we can ask that the planning enforcement team have a look at that very closely, because clearly it's of great danger and that residents are very upset about it, quite rightly. But the second thing is, in terms of this revised temporary layout, I think we've seen in Kenilworth recently with a number of developments where pedestrian and cycling access to developments has been delayed until most of the residences are completed. And my question is, with this revised temporary access layout, which I find remarkably confusing, what protection is there for those, particularly children who are occupying the new houses during the construction period? How are they going to be disentangled from all the construction traffic coming through this temporary access? Where are the safety measures to allow safe cycling and walking for all residents from the day that the first house is occupied? How will they get safely out of the scheme to school? And by delaying the final scheme, and agreed if that's a good scheme for safety, they have to wait until all the houses are finished until they can get a safe access to school. Can you please explain how this revised temporary access is safe for pedestrians?
I'll press the right button. Yes, Councillor Kennedy. If you look at the plan, you'll see either side of the access road, there is on the one side, on the left-hand side, there's a shared footway cycleway which connects to the bridleway, and on the other side there is a 2-metre footway which connects to the bridleway. Now that will be constructed as part of this scheme. Following on from that, there is a footway that runs around the end of Brimstone End, I believe, which would then connect to the bridleway. So that does provide a route out of the site onto Brimstone End and onto the bridleway that will be fenced off, separate from the construction vehicles.
Sorry, can I just come back? So that is currently being, is it under construction? Is it being constructed?
That is under construction at the moment, Councillor, yes.
Councillor Luckhurst.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the wording of condition 30 and 31, it says prior to the application of the final dwelling in the development, then it goes on to say what we do. Is there any stipulation as to when that must be, or can they just sort of delay the final house for indefinitely and then they wouldn't have to actually do it? So what protection have we got against that?
In terms of the condition obviously, the latest point they can do it is at the final occupation. It may be brought forward earlier, but obviously the condition requires them that the final, on completion of the final occupation. Obviously, if members want a different trigger, be that the completion of the final dwelling, so for instance, when the majority of large construction traffic will have left the site, that could potentially be an option. Instead, obviously, of completion rather than occupation, that may be a consideration. Obviously, I'll run that by our legal services officer, but obviously that would then bring the trigger forward to a point where it's sort of earlier in the process, but obviously still towards the end of the build.
This rather leave us the same issue as to the trigger. Does the trigger have to be the final house, or do we have to choose between occupation or the finishing of the final house, or does it have to be the final house at all? Could we have a different trigger altogether, like the 50th house or the 100th house?
Chairman, the triggers are normally tied to occupation of the dwellings. It doesn't have to be the occupation of the final dwelling. We could have it at occupation of, say, 90% of the dwellings. It's up to the committee if you wish to bring that trigger forward, back into the development. That's open to the committee.
So just sorry to come back on this, Chair. So the committee can then decide, therefore, could be the final one, could be the second one, first one. Is that entirely up to us, and is it legally enforceable?
Yes, it's up to the committee what trigger they wish to impose. They could refuse the application and leave the triggers as they are, and it's then open to the developer to appeal.
Councillor Whiteman.
Thank you. I want to say that Mr Brooks' account of how the current arrangements in practice or deviations from these are adversely impacting him, his family and his neighbours and fellow residents. I found that quite distressing to hear, and I don't think that anyone should be in that position of concern or worry. It's the case that when we consider, or objectors consider, potential objectors consider objecting to initial applications, they do so on the basis of the application that's in front of them at the time with any associated conditions. They make their decision on that basis, and so do we. It strikes me that if there's a later request, which may not be for good or necessary reasons, to vary those conditions, then that could constitute a material change to what was originally approved, and that those people who originally chose not to object on the basis of what they saw in front of them might perhaps have behaved or thought differently if the variations were approved. And of course, none of us has the ability to see into the future, and it's the benefit of hindsight. But it concerns me, based on the articulation of the impact. The proposal concerns me, and whilst I'm not proposing yet that we should go against the officer's recommendation to grant permission, I just wanted to voice those concerns and my acknowledgement of the impact, and say that I'll listen with interest, as always, to the views of the rest of the committee and officers. Thank you.
Councillor Phillips.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Councillor Luckhurst, for asking one of my questions. So, in theory, I agree with you. 184 houses could be occupied or built, and the 185th not occupied or not built, under condition, it's condition 30 at the moment, which doesn't really satisfy anybody, I would think. I think the other point here is I'm really confused on the timing here. I'm hearing from the one or two of the speakers that there are already lorries, etc., coming onto site. So that must mean there is a temporary access already in use. If there is, why is this temporary access being revised? Is it already inappropriate, the temporary access? And why does having to revise what may or may not be inappropriate existing access impact on the timing of the completion of the final proposal in original condition 30? I'm just lost on the timing, what this temporary access has to do, given that we already seem to be in construction, and why, it being a temporary access, it impacts on the timing of the final safer access.
So obviously this is the only vehicular access to the site. So obviously it's currently a construction access. The narrowing issues that was put forward for the permanent access were obviously to protect the residents' amenity on the site and the surrounding area. In terms of the construction access, obviously it has been installed. A temporary access has been installed to allow vehicles to access the site as it stands, and obviously that has now been looked at by the safety officers at the highways who have asked for some additional measures, and it's now proposed to have to install those measures in addition to the temporary access that has been previously approved. Dave will cover that in more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. The thing is, this access is intended to be completed prior to first occupation of the first dwelling. And this provides pedestrian connectivity from the site prior to the final scheme being implemented. Now, the access that's in at the moment is purely for the developer to gain access to the site, partly to build this. They can't build that without getting access to the site, and they're not required to do these works until the first property is completed and occupied. So that's why there is a temporary construction access, and this will be a more permanent temporary access, if you follow.
So if I've just understood you correctly, Mr. Pilcher, there's already an access that you and Highways have approved, and it's being used for you have not approved, from what you just from the look on your face.
I would say that the current access hasn't been approved. This access is more suitable for access to the site.
But you don't want this access to be put in place until the first house is occupied?
That is how the existing planning condition reads, that this temporary access does not need to go in until the first house is occupied.
But until then, you're happy to have an unapproved, potentially, we've heard one of the speakers who lives in the road, happy to have an unapproved access that potentially put residents at danger?
Brimstone End is not public highway, so that is not really the concern of the highway authority. But whether it's an approved access or not, that's a planning matter, I'm afraid.
Not a matter for highway professionals, then?
I can't comment on accesses from private roads. So, yes, I would suggest that it would have been better to have had this constructed from the word go, but I can't enforce that at all.
Yeah, I'm just at a loss for words. I'm really at a loss for words.
I'm sorry, if it's not public highway, it's not the highway authority's responsibility.
But then this is a highway's responsibility. You're proving that there's a temporary access, even though it's still a private road. This is the bit I'm struggling with. Anyway, moving on. When I look at the whys, it's always worth going and looking at the whys to ensure that suitable temporary access for construction vehicles is available. That we've just heard the discussion with Mr. Pilcher. But then to prevent the need for significant reconstruction is one of them. And again, to prevent the need for significant reconstruction works. That just strikes me what the developer seems to be doing here by avoiding significant reconstruction is really just about saving money. This is not about anything to do with the site access. And they could actually put the final access in place before the first house was occupied. That's just a general comment. I'll pass back to other members.
Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just have a question about process? Because we have a planning application before us, which we either, well, we could defer it, I guess, but we either grant or refuse. Mr. Bell, however, has suggested that we could amend the timing element of this, which is moving from first occupation to final occupation, to some other percentage. And I'm slightly confused about it because I always thought that the planning committee just decided planning applications based on what's in front of them.
So, Chairman, just to be clear, with a Section 73 application, you can refuse it, so the conditions remain as they are. You can approve it with the proposed conditions that the developer is suggesting, which is set out in the report, or the committee could approve it with some other wording for these two conditions.
Okay, I'll accept that. Can I just move on to one other thing, point then? Mr. Charles was, am I right that when the construction management plan was agreed, the conditions 30 and 31 were very clear about the timing being on first occupation of properties, that this had to be in place?
At the time of submission of the construction management plan, yes, the conditions were still as drafted by the inspector, so prior to first occupation.
So picking up on Councillor Phillips's point, then what the developer is now finding is that it basically doesn't work for them as it is, and they want to seek a variation in that. Is that the case?
That is correct, yeah.
Finally, Chair, if I may, without wishing to look too far into the future, is there a risk that if we allow this to be varied so that the access is on final occupation of the 185 part of this site, that actually the next phase, the 500 that you refer to, actually also starts work, and the final occupation of the 105th property is many years down the track?
Obviously, if a second phase came in for the remainder of the allocation, that would be separate to this permission, so the condition would still bite based upon the numbers on this application. So an additional application wouldn't delay the delivery of this access. With any future phase, obviously that is subject to a secondary access being installed adjacent to the camping school, which obviously is not in front of us at the moment, but obviously that access is required in order to serve any more properties on this development. So in terms of this, at the occupation point that is determined this evening, that would be based upon this phase only and wouldn't be counted in any future phases.
Thank you, Chair. I'm reassured by that point anyway. Thank you.
Okay, just for clarity, we've got an approved access, which the developers aren't happy with, but we've got one. So what we're doing is making a judgment, as I understand it, between keeping what's there now, or this, or something like this. They're the options. So there will be access to the site. It's whether the committee feel that this is safer than what's there now, which is approved for use. And then potentially, if you preferred this to be safer, then when would you want it to cut in? So they're the choices we've got. Councillor Yella Prahang.
Thank you. It's Yella Pragada. Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Oh, well, about access, you said that there is pedestrian access. The officers have said there is pedestrian access, but is a cycle path also included in it? And is there a segregated path between pedestrians and cyclists? That's one question. The second one is about the speed limit. I've seen that in the new housing estate in Myton Green, although the speeding limit was 30, there was so much of confusion because no signs were put up. So are the signs going to go up saying it's 20 speed limit prior to residents get into the houses, move into the houses? Or if they are planning to put up a sign, speed limit sign, when is that going to be put up? Thanks.
In terms of the first point, yes, the revised temporary access that's on the screen in front of you now has a cycleway here, a 3 metre wide foot cycleway on this side, which will be served by an access separate to the vehicular access here. So there will be separate access for cycles and pedestrians on this side. And then this side is served by a 2 metre footpath, which will also be served by block paving in this area sort of as well, to give segregated access for pedestrians and cyclists away from the main vehicular access. So there will be no need for pedestrians or cyclists to be in the carriageway where they could come into conflict with vehicles. And then obviously that connects into the wider footpaths in the area as well. In terms of the second point, I'm not sure what the trigger point would be from a highways perspective, so I'll hand you over to Dave.
In respect of the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, that is proposed anyway. We are currently going through the traffic regulation order process to implement a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit on the existing residential roads. I'm not sure when that's going to be implemented. It might be implemented as part of the final scheme that this developer is proposing later on, or it could be implemented sooner. That 20-mile-an-hour limit will extend down into the new housing estate as soon as it becomes public highway.
Thank you.
Councillor Gifford.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say, I felt that when Mr. Brooks mentioned the problems and that are happening at the moment with the construction, I did feel for him. And he's absolutely correct that it would be so much better if the new access, if the extra access was available. Sadly, we're not at that situation. It's not something where we can make a decision on the extra access. I noticed that there's a proposal on the very late for a new condition, which I assume was worked out with Dave Pilcher and Dan Charles.
So yes, Councillor, in terms of the update sheet, following the consideration of that access point, it was considered appropriate to have a revision to the temporary access, which would need to be delivered prior to that first occupation, obviously in order to give pedestrians and cyclists segregated access whilst construction vehicles are still using the site. So that condition now would require this access to be delivered prior to the first occupation, and then the final access delivered prior to the final occupation. So there will be traffic calming and narrowing measures in place prior to anyone occupying the site, and that will obviously give the segregated access for pedestrians and cyclists as well.
It's quite clear that the construction at the moment, with the access that's there at the moment, is not working well. So almost this description given by Mr. Brooks is such that I have to say having a more organised access would appear to be the sensible way to go. That said, I'm concerned about the temporary access, the permanent access not being built until the final occupation of the final house, and that could be years down the line. I would have thought that if we were to say, instead of it being prior to occupation of the final dwelling, it would be prior to occupation of the 90th dwelling or the 100th dwelling, so that it's at a stage where a lot of the housing has already been occupied, and it's could be thinking about the safety of those people who've moved in, as well as those who are already living in the existing houses. But those who've moved into, really, I suppose it's a question for Dave Pilcher. Would it be safer? Would it be better for new occupants to the new site to have the temporary access that's been suggested here, or would it be better to have, once they've moved in, you've got 100 people say houses they've been built, but the rest, there's still houses being built. Would it be better to have, for an occupant, to have the temporary or the permanent access?
That is an interesting question, Councillor. I was just thinking about that. Obviously, from the purpose of management of pedestrians, cyclists and traffic, the sooner we could get that permanent access in, the better. But the applicant has applied to vary the condition to not deliver it until the final occupation. I think, as Dan has said, you could vary that. I wouldn't have any objections if you wanted to reduce the number of units before that permanent access goes in. I would strongly suggest, however, that the off-site works, we continue to seek those at the end of the construction phases, because it will be a lot more disruption for residents to put those in now and then have to reconstruct them because they're not generally suitable for construction vehicles. But certainly in terms of this access, I think if you wanted to reduce the number of units before the permanent access goes in, the Highway Authority would support that. But the only thing I would say is that will involve a full Section 278 agreement, which does take some time to process, and I think there is still an adoption issue on Brimstone End, which would involve another developer, and I don't know what the situation would be with the licensing or legal arrangements on that. So it might take some time for that process to go through before the developer's actually in a position to be able to do those works.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. These conditions were implemented and deemed necessary at the time of approval, so I don't understand what has significantly changed since that application went in, because surely all of these points that we're talking about right now were also considered at the time. So how have we implemented that and now we're saying it doesn't? I just can't wrap my head around that. And I completely sympathise with residents that we are, we're setting a precedent here to say that we can change conditions when it suits the developers better, when these conditions were put in place to mitigate the impact on the community and on the residents. I just don't think there's strong enough reason to revise these conditions. Yeah, if you could answer, sorry, what has significantly changed first, and then I've got some follow-up.
Obviously, the conditions that were recommended and were put onto the appeal decision, that was recommended at the time as an appropriate trigger. Obviously, with any application, when it comes to delivering these aspects, there are obviously potential complications or difficulties in delivering certain works. As Dave mentioned, with the adoptions work, that could take time. Therefore, obviously, we have to, any application for conditions can be varied, and obviously we have to assess that on its merits, and on this one we have looked at it and made that judgment that revising that condition wording for the delivery would be an acceptable compromise in this situation. So it is something that we have looked at, and obviously the highway safety officers that Dave liaises with as well have obviously considered that to be acceptable, subject to this revision for the revised temporary access, which is obviously similar in design to the permanent access, with just some minor variations to obviously create that narrowing of the access point in order to get that safety issue installed at an earlier stage.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is nothing has changed since the original application went in, other than this makes it easier for the developers. And on the point that Councillor Phillips brought up, and I know you're saying, you know, highways, it's private land, and therefore they are not required to do it necessarily. We have developments, in my ward, I have a development that every single resident lives there. We've got over 200 homes, and the road markings are still not finished, and they have to pull out onto a 40-mile-an-hour road with no road markings. It's diabolical. If we are waiting for the last house to come in whilst we've got over 100 residents, households that are occupied, it's disastrous. I vote that we reject this application.
Councillor Kennedy.
Could I just, my understanding, is Brimstone End not an adopted highway yet?
As far as I'm aware, the adoption process hasn't been completed.
So neither that and clearly that any new road is not adopted. Does that constrain in any way what the Highways Authority can recommend or enforce?
Obviously, the internal layout is going to be constructed to adoptable standard. We are in negotiations with the previous developer to adopt those, but these processes take some time.
Councillor Whiteman.
Thank you, Chair. So I wanted to make a point that I think underpins the point that Councillor Davison was making, that I think linked the point that I made earlier, which is that if you approve a situational scenario with a specific set of conditions, and then there's a non-compliance or partial non-compliance or deviation from those conditions, a suitable solution to that isn't then replacing that set of conditions with a new set of conditions, to my mind, because that just invites the opportunity for similar non-compliance or deviation from the new set of succession conditions. So on that basis, and hearing the views of other committee members and public speakers, I would like to second Councillor Davison's proposal that we refuse this application.
Councillor Davison, did you actually, that was a proposal?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't use the word propose, I used the word vote. I propose.
Right, so I've proposed and seconded to refuse recommendations and remain with the system as is. All those in favour of rejecting the proposed changes, please show. That's 9. Those against? 1. 1 against. That is clearly not, it's carried that we refuse. Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 5, which is W/25/0455, Milverton House, Court Street, Royal Leamington Spa.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, we've done a refusal. We need the planning reasons why we're refusing. Yeah, I think that's probably right. But Councillor Davidson came up with a number of reasons, which I think we have enough of.
So what do you specifically need here? Usually there is a policy that we apply, but in this case we are doing it on the basis that the original plan was implemented. Those conditions were put there to mitigate the impact on residents, and we believe that that reason still stands and nothing has significantly changed.
What we've got is that 30 and 31 were put in by the inspectors, and we have looked at it and decided that the reasons for putting those late additions in from the inspectors was correct and was in the interest of the residents. I think that might be enough.
Chairman, just looking at the conclusion of the report, it's obviously relating to highway safety, and officers consider there wouldn't be any highway safety implications. So by refusing the application, with the committee, I think, is saying there would be highway safety implications, because there aren't any other. It's just about highway safety. There aren't any other planning issues.
I don't understand that. Why were they originally put in? Why were those conditions originally put in? Nothing has changed. This is what I don't understand. What has changed from what I've heard is that the developers want to make their lives easier throughout construction.
I think that is the case, because the reasons that they were giving was that the construction of the proposal wasn't strong enough for taking the heavy vehicles in, so it would mean they would need to reconstruct the entrance again.
Yes, so why were the conditions put there originally? That's the reason.
For highway safety.
Yeah, right. So this, I don't get that. If highway safety originally put those conditions in for highway safety, and now highways are saying that we don't need those conditions for highway safety, that's a contradiction to the policy that was originally put in. Can someone else help me out here? Does that make sense?
Presumably we had the inspectors, nothing to do with the county or anyone else, who decided that for safety reasons they needed to put controls on this entrance to the site. Now, the fact that the county council say, well, this will be all right, we're backing the inspectors. Two professional judgments. One is the inspectors who put the controls on against the district council who say, well, we think this will be better. Is that right?
Chairman, by refusing the application, the committee is saying there would be an impact on highway safety by amending the conditions, which is why it's been refused.
Yes, and also that the county council highways people were commenting on unadopted roads that had nothing to do with it.
Well, the committee has gone against the advice of the Highway Authority. So if this is appealed, we will need to secure...
Sorry, if it's an unadopted road and the highways won't comment, then surely we're the only ones who can say anything about it.
Councillor Kennedy.
Yes, a couple of things. I think we need to stick with the inspectors, and the appeal cost us a lot of effort and loan money. So I think it would be good that we say we stick with what the inspector advised, because this was the best solution, and we accepted that in the end. The other thing is, I don't want to, maybe I shouldn't quote Mr. Pilcher while he's no longer here, but he did say the sooner the better to get the permanent access in. And that was clearly, that's desirable, and I think we should stick with it.
And we agree that the sooner the better is the way to go. smoke has risen, we're okay, we're moving on. Agenda item 5, W/25/0455, Milton House, Court Street, Leamington Spa.
Thank you, Chairman. This is another variation of condition application for conditions 4 and 5 of Planning Commission W19/0531, which was an outline application for the erection of 2 number blocks of residential accommodation consisting of up to 90 bed spaces together with undercroft parking to allow revisions to the access scale and layout of the approved scheme. Pressing the wrong buttons here. Should be pressing the keyboard. There we go. So this is the site location plan edged in red, so it relates to 2 buildings on either side of Court Street. Milverton House is the building on this side, and then Drummond House is the building on the opposite side. So just an aerial photograph showing the 2 sites. For reference, obviously you've got the Stony Arms development here, which has been recently completed and is now occupied in operation, so the old schoolhouse with its extension. This is Milverton House under this building here, and then Drummond House here. For context, this is the doctor's surgery here. You've got residential properties at Tower Close to the rear, and then the union blocks of student accommodation are these buildings here adjacent to the canal which runs along the south of this plan. So these are the revised parameters plans. So basically they are simple blocks delineating the maximum dimensions of any future development which would come forward at reserved matters stage. So this basically sets the maximum height, maximum depths and everything else. So the original scheme was done in outline, and if we just, these were the original parameters plans which were conditioned. A reserved matters scheme was submitted, which did not comply with the parameters plans in terms of the overall dimensions of the building, and that was subsequently refused for being contrary to the outline permission, as well as some other site-specific issues to do with the overall design and appearance of the building. What we are dealing with here is just purely the overall parameters. So the revised parameters that have come in have been essentially similar in overall dimensions to those that were originally approved, with some variations, including revisions to the access point that were required to move the accesses from being directly opposite to each other. So in terms of the overall scale, height-wise and overall depth-wise, the parameters are now back in line approximately, with some minor tweaks here and there, back in line with what was originally approved. So this is Milverton House. Again, no detailed fenestration, it's purely scaled that is being set here, which is why it looks like a pile of stacked up cardboard boxes. But obviously that's just to delineate the overall scale. So that's Milverton House. Again, a total of 4 stories with the top story set back, with undercroft parking slightly subterranean at ground floor level. And then Drummond House is slightly increased proportionally. Obviously, this building itself is on the opposite side, where it's not backing onto residential properties. So there's a few variations here, including an increase in height on this corner in order to get the access pedestrian access in at that point. So again, as I mentioned, these were the indicative plans setting the scale of Milverton House. And then this was the indicative indicative Drummond House elevations. So just some photos of the site. So this is looking towards the rear of the Stony Arms, with the old schoolhouse and the new extension that's been just recently completed. So we're panning round. So this building in front of us now with the buff brick under the tin roof is Milverton House. So we just pan round. And then the medical centre, the back there, with obviously the union building to the rear of that. And I was just looking the other way. This is a newly built residential building here on the corner of Cumming Street, with Drummond House is just on this site here, as you'll see as the photos spin round. So this is Drummond House, again, a taller but still single-storey building, and again just showing the relationship with the properties in the background. So just some photos of the site. Again, at the rear, these are the properties on Tower Street. This is the back of the Milverton House site with the boundary here, which is split from the site by a substation in this location. You can just see the end of the schoolhouse here. Sorry, the old school building there. So this is a variation of conditions to the Outline Planning Commission to seek variations to the parameters plans only. The Outline Planning Commission remains extant, and that expires or requires a submission of reserved matters by the 7th of December. The revised parameters plans submitted are now considered acceptable, and any future detailed scheme will be assessed on its own merits, and the scheme is therefore recommended for approval. I should also mention the previous scheme was subject to a Section 106 agreement as well, which will still be valid when carried forward with any decision that was made on this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I have a number of speakers. Councillor Ruggie Singh from Royal and Spa Town Council. You have 3 minutes, so you probably don't need that.
Thank you, Chair. The Royal Leamington Spa Town Council reiterates our previous objections as follows. The scale, massing, and height of the development and the potential for overlooking would have a negative impact on the residents in Tower Street and constitutes overdevelopment. Point 2, policy RLS 1.4 of the Emerging Neighbourhood Plan for Leamington supports specific types of residential development in the Court Street area, as defined in allocation H16 of the local plan, namely community-led housing and live-work units to support the creative quarter aspirations. The development proposed in this application does not deliver on this. Policy RLS 5A of the Emerging Neighbourhood Plan requires proposals for new housing developments to provide a mix of homes and specifically to support affordable owner occupation in South Leamington. There is as yet no confirmation of what proportion of affordable housing will be included in this development as per the local plan policy H2. The Town Council also supports the objection of WCC landscapes officers. Thank you.
Thank you. And call on Mrs. Meg Bond. Again, you have 3 minutes when you start.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Meg Bond, and I'm speaking on behalf of 16 other objectors. I live close to this site and have engaged with this proposed development through all its twists and turns since it was first submitted in 2019. Months ago, I asked the case officer what exactly we could object to in this application because as a Section 73, we were not familiar with it. He suggested all outstanding concerns should be stated, but in the event, his focus proves much narrower, and confusingly, access, scale and layout apparently include cycle parking. The officer says secure cycle parking will be provided in his report. Last week, I asked in vain for evidence for that. Today, it has emerged that it will be dealt with at the reserved matters stage. The officer also says in his report that the Bellway has already discharged all pre-commencement conditions and so on. Again, last week, I asked for clarification of that. Tonight, I've learnt that that was a drafting error. The officer claims too that with respect to noise disturbance from an adjacent business, and I noticed he didn't show you the back of Drummond House abutting Althorpe Street industrial estate, he says the applicants engaged with the owners, an agreement was put in place to provide a solution to the noise by replacing the compressor. The owner of that business in question is Mr. Johal of Tire Fit Autos. Mr. Johal told me this morning that that has never happened and it should not have been stated in the Section 106 agreement. So why is this assertion repeated here without apparent foundation? And how will this be resolved to Mr. Johal's satisfaction, let alone the Environmental Health Officer's satisfaction. Finally, amongst all the other matters left unaddressed are the key issues of the exact number of units and room sizes. 67 of the currently proposed 78 flats are 50 are below the 37 square metres minimum in the nationally described space standards. Worse still, 30 are at best just over 30 square metres. So 1 in 3 of all occupants, and no one understands who they might be, will be living in very cramped conditions with their amenities seriously impacted. Will these and all other outstanding grounds for objection be dealt with in a forthcoming Reserved Matters application, which ostensibly will be about appearance and landscaping?
Draw your remarks to a close, please.
Yes, I will, Chair. Especially in light of the misleading information provided in this report, we are doubtful, and as objectors, we urge you to satisfy yourselves that you do not leave any issues of concern unaddressed tonight, which later you won't be allowed to deal with, nor do you grant consent at this stage to matters which you are insufficiently informed about. Thank you.
Thank you. Members. Councillor Kennedy.
Can I understand about this? It's an alteration to the outline planning permission, which has already been granted. Is that correct in my understanding of it?
Yes, Councillor Kennedy, that is correct. Outline planning permission was granted in December 2022 for this scheme, subject to a Section 106 agreement, with the conditions setting the parameters for any future reserve matters, and it is those parameters plans that we're seeking that are being sought to amend.
Now, if this is amended, does then the three-year period of the outline planning permission start again? Is it in effect a new outline planning permission?
No, the guidance states that any Section 73 will be subject to the original timescale. So there will be the timescale as it stands with an outline. There is a requirement for submission of reserve matters within 3 years of the date of the permission, which was the 7th of December 2022. And then the implementation must be within 2 years of the grant of the final reserve matters. So in terms of the outline, that would not be extended beyond the 7th of December the target date of 7th of December 2025, as in roughly a month's time.
Okay, so the applicant will have to submit, whatever we decide, they would have to submit reserve matters then. Could I just ask one more question? We looked at this and planning permission was granted before the adoption of our net zero carbon DPD. As we are now revising this at a period when we have adopted the net zero carbon DPD, would that now be applicable to this application?
As it's varying an existing permission, which is still extant, we're unable to implement the requirements of net zero.
Councillor Luckhurst.
Thank you. Well, kind of a general question. It's Councillor Ruggie Singh brought up the emerging local plan. Can we use it and can we legally defend it if something goes against the emerging local plan? Does that make sense?
In terms of, obviously, yes, as mentioned, the neighbourhood plan at the time of the decision previously was not part of the consideration process. And obviously what we have to do is be mindful of the fact that this is an extant permission that could be implemented in line with the existing parameters without having to comply with those requirements. So it would be unreasonable to impose those at this stage now.
Councillor Gifford.
Yes. I have to say I felt the Conservation Officer's comments and objection were very relevant in this particular case. The Conservation Officer says The original outline set parameters in terms of height, scale and footprint. The variation seeks to enlarge the buildings that we originally raised concerns over. Proposal would create a dominant and overwhelming presence, resulting in harm to both the Leamington Spa and the canal conservation areas. The design approach is not supported as per the previous comments. I would be very happy to propose that we refuse this application on those grounds.
Just to clarify, Councillor Gifford, those comments were made on the original scheme, on the original revised parameters, which came in with the application, which essentially were the same plans that were submitted for the reserved matters. So obviously, a reserved matters submission was made with plans that didn't comply with the outline. They were obviously assessed and subsequently refused. They then submitted those plans to update the parameters. We deemed those plans to be unacceptable. So the revised plans that are in front of you are essentially resetting the scheme back to a similar scale as was originally approved. And I didn't receive an updated comment from the Conservation Officer on the revised plan. So obviously the scale has been reduced back to similar to the original scheme. But obviously it's entirely up to members to make that decision. I just thought I'd make you aware of that point.
Through you, Chair, can I just clarify, Councillor Gifford, was that a proposal or was that just a comment that you've just made?
It was a proposal, but maybe I'll wait. And unfortunately, what was said just now wasn't put in the. I didn't notice it, but when I read the application.
There was a comment at this stage.
But I think I'll wait and see what other people have to say.
Councillor Sinner.
Yeah, a little query from me, Chair. We've heard about the size of the rooms and the occupation. We don't know who's going to occupy this, and we don't even think the rooms are big enough. Is that a relevant factor that should be taken into account?
In terms of the scheme, obviously, any proposal based upon this needs to be resubmitted for reserved matters approval, which includes the appearance, and that will need to be submitted separately, and that will take into consideration the room sizes. That was a reason for refusal on the previously submitted reserved matters, was the scale of the rooms not being big enough in terms of future occupiers' amenity. So that will need to be taken into consideration with the reserved matters. Obviously, we don't formally adopt the national space standards, but obviously we do have the ability to make a judgment based upon occupancy and residential amenity. So it is something that we can consider, but obviously we couldn't put a condition on that says you must adhere to the national space standards, because we have to adopt those as part of the development plan, which we haven't done. But obviously any proposal that comes forward, we have to make an assessment of residential amenity, which obviously the national space standards do provide a good basis for the consideration of what is reasonable. And obviously on the previous scheme that my colleague dealt with, that was refused, and that was one of the refusal reasons. So any future reserved matters would need to address those reasons for refusal as well when it comes to the resubmission. But at this stage, it's not what we are only considering just purely the parameters and the scale of the building.
Okay, so I'm guessing this is a consideration further down the road that we have to wait for the time. Has this deliberately been kept loose and open so that we don't have any detail to actually rail against or to question, dig deeper on?
With outlines, it's often that you will get a site-edged red and no details. Obviously, this application, the previous outline saw all matters to be considered apart from appearance and landscaping. So the scale and everything else was set at the outline stage, which in most circumstances is rare. But obviously, that's why they have to work to those parameters. And obviously, what they're looking at is to make sure those parameters work for their occupation. But essentially, yeah, the final detail and nitty-gritty window placement, room sizes and everything else would be subject to a separate application further down the line.
Thank you. I was going to ask about community assets and utility and community use, which is obviously in the balance. Is that not considered at this stage, or is that further down the line?
In terms of community use, obviously the site itself, currently there are the community uses on the site which would be lost as a result of this development. There is nothing in the original outline that requires any community use to be installed within the development, so it's not something that we can consider. Obviously, anything that's currently on the site would be lost as a result of this development moving forwards, but we can't insist on community uses to be incorporated within the development.
Through you, Chair, I have it's just been brought to my attention that this is actually a Warwick District Council owned asset. So at this point, please could I request all Cabinet members to leave the room and not partake in any votes. Thank you very much.
You'll never know the room sizes now. Because the assets are District Council owned, then members of the Cabinet, who are responsible for making decisions, can't take part in the discussion.
Chair, at this point, could I ask you to adjourn just so we can seek some legal advice and speak to the planning officer?
Yes, as it's 10 to 8 and we would have stopped at 8 anyway, we'll stop early and recommence at 8 o'clock. Okay, councillors, can we start? Just have a legal comment.
Chairman, sorry for that confusion. Just to explain, the Warwick District Council owns part of the site, which it leases to the developer who owns the other half of the site. So for that reason, Cabinet members shouldn't be taking part.
Hence, they were asked to leave. Could have said thrown out, but asked to leave is probably better. Right. Let's carry on. Councillors. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if you could go back, Mr. Charles, to the drawings that show the massing. Keep going. That's it. Keep going. There. That's Milverton House, and then I think the next one or the one before is Drummond House, isn't it? Are those different to what was in the original outline application, and even different from what was in the original reserved matters, which of course the committee members haven't seen?
These plans here, so obviously for Drummond House and Milverton House, those were the original plans that were in the outline that were referenced in the condition as the parameters plans. These plans are different to the ones that were submitted at reserve matters. They were basically exceeded the dimensions of the parameters at the outline stage in terms, I think it was approximately 1.5 metres difference in overall height, increased depth, and everything else. Basically, most of the parameters were exceeded in all dimensions. Those plans were originally submitted as part of this scheme as basically to supersede the parameters plans. So essentially, what was the original request was to the scale of plans that was submitted for reserve matters wanted to be replaced as the parameters plans for the outline, essentially then allowing for those plans to be resubmitted as a reserve matters scheme, and obviously subject to assessment, obviously whilst complying with the outline parameters. Obviously, we said the increased dimensions were very much clear that we needed the dimensions to be set back for Milverton House, especially on the basis of the impact on the properties on Tower Street. Hence the reason that the building on this side is very much stepped away from those properties on Tower Street. The revised Milverton House still has the stepping at first, second and third floor. Obviously the fourth storey does sort of follow straight up from the second floor at this point here. And then obviously you've got the mezzanine or the upper level, which we're basically saying should be more of a lightweight structure, should be set in. And obviously there are these elements that do allow for courtyards or raised courtyards, balcony type areas as well within that parameter. So that's the maximum size that they can build to. So in terms of the dimensions, they are back, in terms of height especially, they are back in line with the overall height of the approved scheme, which was one of the key elements. Obviously, I think there was off the top of my head, it was about 1.4 metres height difference overall, and obviously it was very much a solid mass on the top floor, which was deemed unacceptable and outside of the parameters. So these parameters plans are generally back in accordance with the scheme that was submitted on the original outline.
So basically the massing is exactly the same as the original, more or less the same as the original application.
Essentially, yeah. Milverton House essentially is very much back to where it started. There are some revisions to Drummond House with the revised access point being on the corner. It was bringing the corner of the site up to that level in order to get access and stairwells and everything else up to the top floor. I think the scheme as originally shown obviously had an access point here, but didn't then provide access to the top floor. It terminated at the second floor. So obviously the revision here is to bring that height up in this corner and essentially a bigger top floor on the scheme in order to maximise the space on that building.
Thank you.
That's helpful, thanks.
Next. Councillor Kennedy.
In view of the limited scope of what we're considering now and the explanations that we've been given, I would propose that we grant these amendments in line with officers' recommendations.
Okay, so I have proposals to accept. Anyone else? Seconder? Councillor Dixon.
Yes, based upon the reassurances provided to my answers just, yes, I will second that.
Okay, we now move to a vote. All those in favour of the...
Sorry, before we go to a vote, can I just clarify that that proposal includes the updated condition that was in the update report?
Yes.
I'm sorry, could you just read out what the updated condition is, because it was some time ago I read it.
So the update to conditions is the time limit condition incorrectly states 7th of December 2021. This has been amended to 7th of December 2022.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Was there also an amendment around there was a misdrafting of the use of Bellway when it should have been something else? Is that correct in the report?
Yes, so in the update report, it does say that the reference to Bellway is a drafting error and they have no involvement or interest in the site.
Okay, so we approve that amendment to the report, is that correct?
Yes. Okay, so all those in favour, please show. That's 6. Those against? 2. That's clearly carried in line with the ADOBs and the recommendations. Thank you. Now move on to agenda item 7, which is
Could we
WB
get
20.
the other members back in before we start? Yeah. Just in time.
Thank you. They said they wanted you back, so I've already gone. Agenda item 7, W/25/0519/LB, Sheldon Bosley Knight, Denby Buildings, Regent Grove.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is a listed building consent application for a TV display screen and surrounding window vinyl. The scheme is part retrospective insofar as the TV screen is installed and a window vinyl has been installed, but amended plans have been received to replace that vinyl, as will be seen from the slides. So this is the application site edged in red. So it's a estate agent's property on the Regent Grove and a row of listed buildings within the conservation area of Leamington Spa, actually just around the corner. We're all sat roughly here somewhere. So just an aerial photograph which shows the site and its relationship, obviously, with Regent Grove. A row of premises here, predominantly estate agents and other commercial uses within sort of a secondary core of Leamington Town Centre. So this is the existing street frontage prior to the installation of any details. Obviously, an attractive Grade 2 listed building. So the revision here is, you can just see the blue outline here. There is another slide here. This is a revision to the scheme, which at the moment is predominantly orange in nature as part of the, as you can see from the plans, obviously Sheldon Bosley's colours are corporate colours are orange and blue. The existing sign is predominantly orange, and it was considered more appropriate to have it predominantly blue, as you will see from the next slide. So it's basically, the TV screen is freestanding and set behind this the window display. The border is predominantly blue with the orange pinstripe around the outside. The touchscreen itself is a film that's applied to the glass, which allows for the control of the TV screen by members of the public. So it's not, the TV screen is not physically attached to the window. It is freestanding, albeit up against the glass. So this is the site. As you can see, the orange outline there is very much much more prominent in the street scene. Along the road there, you've got various other signage and everything else from other buildings along that row. But obviously, it was deemed that the orange was not satisfactory to the setting of that building. Hence the revised scheme. So again, just a close up. One of the other elements that we've asked to be removed is, obviously, you've got this sort of jagged finish to the top, and that's going to be straightened out with the revised scheme. Summary of the main points: it's application for listed building consent. It's part retrospective insofar as the window display is already installed. The revised scheme has been considered acceptable by the Conservation Officer, and the conditions will secure the required changes to the window display. So the recommendation is to grant listed building consent. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I have two speakers. Mr. Bruno Uric is the first one objecting. Again, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Members, I'm speaking again on behalf of the Leamington Society, who strongly object to this proposal. Visitors gain real value from the preservation of our heritage buildings and conservation areas. Their unique historic character enhances commercial identity and draws both locals and visitors. This proposal, however, would harm that very character. The dominant illuminated digital display and coloured vinyls are wholly inappropriate within a listed building and in this historic street. They conflict with the Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Planning Act and both national and local conservation policies. And indeed, Conservation originally recommended it for refusal for both the screen dominance and the vinyls. Although the applicant has now changed the colour of the vinyl surround, that is only a cosmetic tweak, and Conservation did not mention the colour as being a factor. And it does not address the fundamental following harms. Firstly, harm to historic character. The bright advertising screen and thick vinyl surround dominate the window. The bold colour blocks are designed to grab attention, not to respect the restrained, balanced facade of this historic terrace. They appear intrusive and undermine the building's integrity. This is not a branch of Rumbelows in a shopping precinct. Secondly, impact on the conservation area. Regent Groves dates back to before 1783 and is one of Leamington's oldest streets. The active screen, oversized for its setting, is highly visible from public viewpoints. It disrupts the street's historic rhythm and diminishes the special character the conservation area seeks to protect. There is no clear public benefit to outweigh this harm. Thirdly, light and visual pollution. The screen emits strong light and moving images, introducing constant visual distraction, particularly harmful in the evening and to nearby residents. It's already displaying animated adverts that go well beyond property particulars, material that would be difficult for the council to monitor or control.
Fourthly, setting a precedent. If approved, this would open the door for other intrusive digital displays in historic shopfronts, gradually eroding the conservation area's distinctive appearance. And finally, contrary to Net Council guidance, the Council's own design advice on shopfronts and advertisements stresses that modern commercial pressures must not override the need to preserve historic character. This proposal clearly failed that test. Next slide, please, Dan. Planning inspectors have dismissed similar appeals for digital screens in conservation areas, notwithstanding any listed building status. In summary, the active screen and vinyls are incongruous with both the listed building and the wider conservation area. The Council is required to have special regard to the desirability of preserving the building or its setting or any features of special architectural or historic interest, and this must take precedence over short-term commercial convenience. We urge the committee to refuse this application.
Thank you. I have one more speaker, Miss Isabella Alford, supporter. Yeah, 3 minutes from when you start.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to support an illicit building consent application for digital display and window vinyl at Denby Buildings, Regent Grove. This proposal represents a thoughtful and well-balanced response to earlier feedback, offering a sensitive enhancement to a historic retail frontage. The revised scheme introduces a transparent touchscreen film externally, paired with a freestanding internal display unit. Importantly, this unit is not physically attached to the listed building, and all components are fully reversible, ensuring no permanent alteration to the historic fabric. This approach reflects a genuine respect for the building's architectural integrity. Warwick District Local Plan Policy, HE1, requires the development proposals preserve the significance of designated heritage assets. Where less than substantial harm is identified, it must be weighed against the public benefit. In this case, the Conservation Officer has confirmed that the revised proposal has neutral impact on both the listed building and the wider Royal Leamington Spa conservation area. This is a key endorsement demonstrating that the scheme has been carefully refined to meet heritage expectations. The proposal also aligns with national guidance, particularly paragraphs 212 and 214 of the National Planning Policy Framework. These paragraphs emphasise the importance of conserving heritage assets while recognising the need to support sustainable development. The public benefit here is clear. The digital screen improves accessibility and visibility of property listings, helping residents and visitors engage with local property market more easily. This contributes to the vitality of the town centre, encouraging footfall and supporting local businesses. In addition, this scheme complies with Royal Leamington Spa's Neighbourhood Plan Policy RLS3, which supports development that respects the character and significance of listed buildings and conservation areas. The design is modest and streamlined now, with careful attention paid to scale, colour and placement. The revised vinyl reduces the visual clutter and avoids dominance, maintaining harmony with the surrounding architecture. The shift from the bright orange to a more subdued dark blue is particularly effective, ensuring the display complements rather than completes with the building's historic setting, as confirmed by the Conservation Officer in their report. The Council's supplementary planning guidance on shopfronts and advertisements encourages signage that reflects Leamington Spa's elegant Regency character. This proposal responds directly to that guidance, offering a contemporary solution that integrates seamlessly with the traditional streetscape. It demonstrates how modern technology can be sensitively incorporated into heritage environments without compromising their value. In conclusion, this application fully accords with local, neighbourhood and national planning policies. It supports the optimum viable use of the building, enhances the commercial vibrancy of the town centre and preserves the special character of Denby Buildings. It is a considered, respectful and beneficial proposal. I respectfully urge the committee to support the officer's recommendation and grant listed building consent. Thank you.
Thank you. Members? I'll look up more often. I'll start with Councillor Kennedy and I'll work on.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask, is there any condition about when the sign can be operated? I mean, does it run all night? I know in some displays we impose strict requirements on when it can.
There isn't a requirement on this. Obviously, it's a listed building consent application rather than an advertisement consent. So obviously what we're looking at is the impact on the character, setting and fabric of the listed building. I would have to seek advice on whether a time limit condition could be imposed onto a listed building consent. I'm not sure if that's reasonable. I'll probably defer that one to Nigel.
Chairman, the TV that generates the light isn't part of this application. It's a freestanding TV, so the applicant could have a row of TVs in the window. What this application is for the
It's for the frame.
The vinyl that sticks onto the glass, so that the TV that's generating the light is not part of this application. It's freestanding. And as I said, the applicant could have a TV, big TV in every window.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't require listed building consent.
So the only, sorry, I'm getting slightly confused. So the only thing we're looking at is the way the vinyl attaches to the glass, is that right?
Yes, and I can't see how you could impose a time condition on a...
No, I sort of understand that. I'm struggling slightly to see what the issue is. Okay, so it's, if we want, sorry, just to get it straight in my mind, if I wanted to put a sort of beautiful gold picture frame, we're in Kenilworth now, to attach to the glass, that would be something that would be subject to listed building application. Yeah.
Yes, Chairman, because it's affixed or touching the fabric of the listed building.
Right. Okay, thank you.
When I come along the rows, if you decide you don't want to speak on a plastic screen, just move along. Councillor Gifford.
Yes, I'm bemused now because the Conservation Office has said they potentially recommend restricting usage to between 8 AM and 8 PM, which seemed to me to be sensible. If you, on the other hand, if that's not available, then it looks as though we've got a choice between, a straightforward choice between grant and refuse. It's what it appears to me to be. A very simple choice. This is clearly going to be a nuisance at night, and as we can't restrict the nighttime usage, we only have the option of either refusing, which is what I would think is probably quite a sensible thing to do, because it's clearly doesn't benefit the conservation area, and it's quite clear from the conservation officer's comments right at the end, they also felt it was a problem at night, hence wanting to have a condition. I think we could look at refusal, but I'm happy if somebody else proposed that, but that would be my...
Sorry, Chair, I never put my hand up, actually. No, not on this one.
Councillor Davis.
My questions were somewhat related to the energy use, but I suppose you're saying that's now not relevant. What size is the board to start with, sorry?
Sorry, the border?
The vinyl, the screen, what size is it?
Don't have the exact measurement, but I can find out very quickly for you. Bear with me.
And whilst you're looking at that, just in terms of the advertising, which we are not considering here, where would this be considered and why aren't we considering it here? And is this a licensing thing? Because sometimes in planning we do talk about these things. I know, for example, if Sainsbury's built their unit, we have restrictions on how and where they can use their lights and what angle they need to be to not impact residents. So I don't see why that's any different in this case.
Yeah, so whether it needs advertisement consent or not is set out in the advert regulations. So the example you've given of those shop signs, because they're external, they would need advertisement consent normally if they're illuminated. In this case, because the screen itself is internal, it's exempt from the need for advertisement consent. So that's set out in the advert regulations. So.
Councillor Sinnott, you can't...
Yeah, sorry, I kind of had a follow-up, but that's when I know the size of the board, so if you could come back when I know, that would be great.
Councillor Sinnott.
I'm kind of thinking back to Rumbelows when they have a big row of TVs staring out at the window. We're not talking about that. We are talking about a piece of plastic stuck to a piece of glass, and if we object to it, we have to say why we object to that piece of plastic on that piece of glass.
Correct.
I'm not sure I can satisfy our legal officer on that one. Just to clarify it for myself. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, for the younger people, Rumbelows used to sell TVs. Right, I'm now on the back row. Who have we got there? Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Now that it is clarified, it's more about vinyl rather than the screen itself. Initial question, my question was about peregrine falcon that we have on top of the roof here in the town hall. But then that doesn't really matter, does it? I was just thinking, how is that going to be affected? How are the birds going to be affected if it's on throughout the night? But it's not relevant in this scenario. So coming to the vinyl bit, are they definitely going with orange, or they can come up with a black, blue? Okay, because yeah, it was showing orange on the screen over there. So they're going with blue.
Yes, their corporate colours are orange and blue, and we've asked them to reverse the one that has the most colour. So that becomes blue.
Orange and blue.
Where it's orange on there, that will be blue.
So the frame is orange and the middle bit is blue, or is it blue completely? Yeah, that's blue. Okay.
It's predominantly blue with an orange pinstripe around the outside, and obviously where the touchscreen area is, and also circling the top section as well, has got a pinstripe around the outside of orange. Measuring off the plans, the main border itself, in terms of thickness, is around 80 mil or 8 centimetres, and then the bottom of the screen where the touchscreen element is approximately 135 millimetres.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a bit confused. So if they have more screens across the windows, there's nothing, as we are only deciding on vinyl bit.
This is one piece of vinyl on one window.
Okay.
If they want it on more, they have to apply for more.
Thank you.
In a moment. That's Whiteman.
Thank you. So I happened to be parked outside this exact building this evening because I was running even closer to the wire in terms of my timings to get here than I usually am. And this is a street that I often look at and admire because of its historic and heritage significance. And when I do that, and thinking about this street and this application this evening, it strikes me that the architectural and historic character of the building derives from characteristics such as the stone mullioned windows and the wooden doors and the terrace of that type of buildings and those characteristics which runs down the street. And it's also my opinion that approving this application for the window vinyl would not depreciate or detract from any of those elements which I believe make up the architectural and historic character of the building and of the street. So I agree with the WDC conservation comments that granting the proposal would have a neutral impact on the listed building and the wider conservation area. And I would like to propose that the listed building consent be granted. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a proposal. Councillor Phillips, if you want to speak.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Bode. Mr Bell and Councillor Kennedy took away most of the discussion, I think, earlier on. Mr Charles, could you go back to the night scene, please, the photograph? No, that's it. And this is the bit that worries me. When I've looked at it in Google Street Maps, during the day it's unobtrusive, it's not a problem at all. At night, it is quite dominant. So I think if we were to grant this, I would hope that Sheldon Bosley would be responsible neighbours and may perhaps take note of the Conservation Officer's suggestion that they only run it between 8 AM and 8 PM, so it is not so intrusive late at night. But you look at that, and that is dominant during the night, during the day. It's neither here or there, and as Councillor Whiteman says, actually the blue matches, if you look at the blue doors to the left and to the right. So I'm willing to second this.
Good, but you do realise you can't switch off the plastic.
Yes. Yes, but you switch off the... I would hope that Sheldon Bosley would be good neighbours and switch off the TV, or only have the TV on between 8 AM and 8 PM.
Or drop it down to dim.
That's up to them, but
yes.
I'm sure they would be good neighbours. And
they've heard our
neighbours
comments.
would appreciate that, yes.
Anyone else? Councillor Davison.
Yeah, I think we would be having an entirely different debate and discussion here if we could, but we can't. But the developers, or the applicants, sorry, are here, and I think you can take away comments from residents and from committee about the use of this. You know, this is terrible for the environment, the 24-hour electricity use, it's bad for the street scene, it's light pollution. There's so many things wrong with having advertising all the time. And I think you can choose yourselves to apply some decent hours that benefit the residents.
So we're suggesting perhaps a timer. Right, I have a proposal and seconder. All those in favour, please show. That's agreeing with the officer's recommendations. Okay, against? Abstaining on switching plastic off. One. That is clearly carried, so we agree with the officer's recommendations. Thank you very much. And I believe for this evening that finishes our business. So I'll look forward to seeing some, if not all of you, tomorrow. Thank you. Good night.